And we are back on the Zero Hour. This is Richard RJ Eskow, and our guest for this segment is Damon Silvers, who is Director of Policy and Special Counsel for the AFL-CIO. Damon, thanks so much for being with us.
No, my pleasure, Richard.
Listen, here's what's on my mind right now. Well, a lot of things are on my mind, but a couple stories have been really preying on me lately. One was we interviewed a young woman last week who was a manager at McDonald's who talked about how she was instructed to cheat hourly workers on their timesheets and how she was pressured to do that. And that, of course, is now the subject of a lawsuit. And then now we're hearing about some additional legal action forthcoming from employees at Walmart who are working under unsafe conditions, according to the suit, in a warehouse with no fire alarm installed, forklifts with bad brakes, and faulty hydraulics, propane-powered forklifts catching fire, workers suffering frostbite from working in below 15-degree temperatures, injured by falling freight. I used to work in a warehouse. I know how safe that is and how, hellish these conditions sound. So I guess my question for you, just in a broader sense, is how can we reach these workers who are outside right now, at least, of the usual labor umbrella, and provide them with the protections they need and the organization and resources they need and the optimism they need?
Yeah, well, Richard, it's a great question. I mean, we've been, workers have been on the kind of losing end of the economic equation for a long time in this country, and it's gotten a lot worse due to the economic crisis that started, 6 years ago. Mass unemployment creates a situation where workers have no bargaining power at all, and people are desperate to keep their jobs and endure falling wages and unsafe conditions in order to keep working. Now that we've got a little life in our economy, I think working people are in a position where we can do something about the kind of daily injustices that you're describing. But there's a problem, which is that in so many cases now, our labor laws simply don't function in relationship to the kinds of legal runarounds that employers and their lawyers have figured out. So, a lot of the for example, a lot of the warehouses that Walmart relies upon are technically not Walmart warehouses. They're in theory or nominally operated by some sort of go-between, so that Walmart can try to avoid legal responsibility for the kinds of conditions you were describing. We've got a situation where a manager at a McDonald's, who in reality, a manager at a McDonald's is not someone with a vast amount of power. But that manager at McDonald's is not protected by our labor laws from being fired, say, if they speak out in the way that the person you were describing courageously did. So we need to be thinking about, changing our labor laws so that it's not possible for smart lawyers to essentially walk around them on behalf of their employers. So that we need to support President Obama when he's, the proposal that he and Labor Secretary Perez put out recently to really fix our overtime laws so that they really apply to people, to the vast majority of us who need those protections, who need a real 40-hour week and who need time and a half when we're asked to work longer than is really good for us and our families. But the most important thing is the last thing you said, which was this issue of confidence and organizing. And I think we've got some really interesting models for how workers who don't have collective bargaining right now, or who are in situations where elaborate legal structures have been created to hide who their real employer is and make it hard for the workers to actually figure out who to bargain with. We've got some pretty good innovative structures in the labor movement now to take on those kinds of things. The one that I think has had the most impact, frankly, is our Walmart, the organization of Walmart workers that just last week, beat Walmart on the question of how Walmart treats pregnant workers. Their Respect the Bump campaign an amazing effort led by a woman I met who's a full-time Walmart worker. That campaign, web-based, social media, linking Walmart workers around the country together, they moved Walmart to change their policies and treat pregnant women a bit better. But that kind of thing, I think, is a model for how working people, regardless what their titles are or what kind of legal games are being played, can stand together and win. And the way you build confidence is by fighting and winning.
That's a great point. The fighting and winning. I think there's a kind of learned helplessness that sets in when people feel, oh, we can't win. We're on the downward slide. Workers are not going to get ahead. Employees are not going to get ahead. So I think victories are very, very. It's a great point you made. We've got to point out these victories. We've got to celebrate these victories because not only are they good in and of themselves, but they show that it's possible. And by the way, we're talking with Damon Silvers, who is policy director and special counsel for the AFL-CIO. Damon, I grew up in a different world. I grew up in the 60s when everybody in the neighborhood, it seemed. I grew up in a working class neighborhood in a Rust Belt town that essentially, to all intents and purposes, doesn't exist anymore. Everybody in my neighborhood had a good job. Everybody in most of the guys in my neighborhood, and they were guys mostly in those days, you could get by on a single income, my parents' generation. They belonged to a union. My grandfather, in my eyes, was a union hero, and he would tell us stories of, marching on the line and the thugs beating them up, or, the goons sending their black cars and trying to run them down, the stories of the great union heroes of the past. But it seems to me, where's the line today, if you know what I mean? My grandfather, he knew where the line was. He picked up his sign. He told his co-workers, boys, let's go. And they knew they were on that line with those goons and those enemies on the other side. In this day of the internet and this day of treating every employee as an independent contractor and every warehouse as a separate subcontractor to evade responsibility, sometimes I feel like we don't know where the line is and how to fight again. Is it on Facebook? Is it, where is it? And I just love your thoughts about that.
Well, it's funny, Richard, you say this. I mean, on the one hand, I think that we live in a world in which it's possible for working people who would otherwise have been isolated and felt, really and truly alone, right, in their workplace and in their community, in situations where maybe they didn't think anyone else shared what they were experiencing or wanted to do anything about it. We live in a time and a place where, through social media, it's possible for working people around the country to link up in ways that have never been possible before. And I think we're seeing, in terms of like what went on with our Walmart recently, that can be enormously powerful. At the same time, I think the experience you're talking about, that you heard about from your grandfather, is available to anybody who wants it today, in all of the clarity that you're describing, that your family experienced in the past. Standing up for themselves on the job during the era of labor movement growth. And what am I talking about? I took part in, and a lot of other people did. Maybe you did. I took part in the Black Friday protests at the Walmart nearest to me in Laurel, Maryland, last Thanksgiving, and together with a lot of people from our community in support of workers inside the store. Some of whom I've gotten to meet and talk to, and this is not anonymous or confused. And we were at the demand that Walmart workers had was pay us $25,000 a year. Now think about it: $25,000 a year in suburban Washington as a demand. I mean, that's pretty reasonable demand, right? And yet when we got to the store, there was a scene your grandfather would have recognized. Right, it was a scene of a wall of Walmart managers backed up by 25 policemen. Right, and that's what we met when we went to exercise our free speech rights in a public place. That's what we met, right? And that's the reality of the corporate workplace in America today. In a lot of ways, the decline of workers' bargaining power has meant that the velvet glove is off the fist, right? In comparison with the way things might have been, in say in a highly unionized community of the kind you're describing, say, in the 60s or 70s, where it was understood people had rights, that's not how employers see it these days. So, and certainly it's not how Walmart sees it. Walmart's the largest employer in the United States, right? And an employer that clearly is intent on, using intimidation to prevent people from making $25,000 a year.
Well, and how do we get back the kind of energy that, or maybe I should put it a slightly different way. How do we bottle up the energy that you saw that day and spread it around? Because it seems to me we're not seeing that the way we used to, and we're not seeing these corporations when they break the law and when they apply unjust pressure to people in a public. There was a time when you couldn't do that. It'd be all over the newspapers. It'd be on the lead story on the evening news. You can't. There was a time when it just wasn't acceptable. People wouldn't buy your products if you did that kind of thing. And all of a sudden now the moral standard for corporations has gotten so lax they can get away with this stuff. What do we do to get back to that? Where if they did that one day to 100 demonstrators, there'd be 500 there the next day. How do we get that energy back?
Well, look, I think that we're seeing a lot of that type of energy around our country in the last year or so. I think it's really important. This is really heavily linked to the fact that unemployment has fallen a bit, right, and people aren't so much between a rock and a hard place in terms of the economy. Right now, people have a little bit more of a place to stand. And it's very important that we make sure that unemployment keeps going down, right? And that we not listen to the people who say, hey, 5.5% or 6% is now the natural rate of unemployment. Nonsense. We've only seen real wage increases in this country when we've had unemployment below 4%, right? In at least in my lifetime. Right, that's the only circumstance when you get it. And so when you read about arguments in the news and financial press about the Federal Reserve and interest rates and so forth, understand that's the game, right? And so part of this, I'm afraid, is a fight about making sure that we keep unemployment going down, and that we don't listen to folks who would have us run our economy in a natural state where workers have no bargaining power. All right. Now, secondly, I think if you look at what's going on around the country in the last year, ranging from, you talked about McDonald's in the opening, ranging from the fast food strikes around this country to the growing strength of our Walmart movement, to some things that the AFL-CIO has been involved in, day laborers, taxi workers, to the football players at Northwestern University. There is a certain dynamism right now among working people that wasn't there at the depths of the recession 5 years ago. And the critical thing here, though, is, as I said before, is we as a labor movement have got to really be thinking in terms of winning fights. Winning fights is what builds momentum and confidence, right, and begins to create the environment that you were describing earlier. Right? If we think about, we have to build a social movement environment among working people. We can't think about the problem we have right now in terms of you can't think about it too much in terms of dry kind of organizational terms, or institutional terms. We've got to think about it in terms of working people as a whole in this country, union and non-union. They've been on the short end of the stick for a long time. We're only going to get a fair share of what we create if we build that social movement environment and if we win some victories.
Well, we're talking with Damon Silvers, policy director of the AFL-CIO, and I love that you mentioned the NCAA, because I think that fits so well into this discussion, because somebody was making fun of my ability to forecast, and they said, "Who's going to win the NCAA?" I said, "The coaches." It's rigged. The coaches because they make all the money, right? And here's an example of student athletes organizing. They weren't even organizing for money, despite the vast amounts of money they bring into their institutions, and that may come later. They were organizing just to get better protections in their workplace, which is the ball field or the competition, for brain injuries and things. That was their initial issue.
Yep.
And to me, this is a great example of the idea that people who produce something of value that we need to be broader and more imaginative in our definition of what labor is in the 21st century, and more creative about how to organize. And to me, that's a great, here's an old phrase that you probably remember, if our listeners don't: consciousness raising. That to me is a great example, because it's colorful, it's in the public eye, and it's important that these kids are getting together, because their coaches and their institutions aren't doing enough to protect them from permanent injury. So to me, this is the labor movement of the future, isn't it? Or a
Well,
reflection of it, I guess I would say. A
well,
reflection of it.
I think. Look, Richard. I think what the efforts by the players in the NCAA at Northwestern show, right, is that it's not just people who work in a Walmart warehouse who are having, like, the very nature of their employment kind of defined away from them. Right, when the Northwestern thing happened, and I read the legal brief, I said to myself, I just never thought of it this way. I always thought there was a lot of merit to the idea that college athletes and things like Division I NCAA football are not really, that they're employees and they ought to be compensated. I'd always thought that, but what I hadn't realized was that if you think about it for a second, it's not just they need to be employees; they are employees.
Right.
It's just that they are employees now. That most of what they do in the course of their day is in the service of their football team, and that they're being compensated for it with room, board, and tuition. It's just that it's a pittance. It's like Major League Baseball in the days of the reserve clause, right? It's absurd when you actually look at it, but they are employees now. It was like one of those, for me, it was like one of those, one of those double images where you look at one way, you see it one way, look at the other way, you see it two different faces,
Right, the vase and the two old, yeah, right.
Right. These people are employees now, and they asserted it. Like, that was the thing, is that they figured that out and asserted it, and around the issues that mattered for them. Right. And just like in a coal mine, the first issue is, are you going to come out of your work, in one piece? And right. The same thing is true for a college football player as for a coal miner. First question.
And that was that was one of the reasons why I found the topic so engaging, is because I think that corporate America has been extraordinarily imaginative in redefining what it means to be a worker and an employee. So everybody's a free agent, everybody's a contractor, everybody's part-time, everybody's working for a subcontractor or a vendor, like the warehouse people we were talking about with Walmart. All of a sudden, half of Walmart's employees aren't employees anymore, or whoever we're talking about, or they're working for a franchise of McDonald's and that, so while they've been busy thinking up these creative ways to make all of us not their employees, I love that somebody is advancing the ball, so to speak, no pun intended, on advancing the definition of what it means to work for somebody. And that's part of what I was going at. And I guess, just to close off our conversation, we're talking with Damon Silvers of the AFL-CIO, Policy Director and Special Counsel. What's ahead in the future? I'm sure you've read, as I've read, the study that said that 49% of American jobs are going to be automated and or roboticized, and Applebee's is now, you're going to order on your iPad while you're pulling into the parking lot so that they don't have to have servers. And you hear and the taxi drivers are going to lose their jobs, and delivery drivers are going to lose their jobs, and all that. So what's in this kind of, but by the way, I curious to your thoughts. I think they also use technology to try to excuse unnaturally high unemployment rates. It doesn't have to be that way, but what do you see in this kind of changing environment as the next 20 years of labor growth and challenge?
Well, let me first say that we have high unemployment, right, and we have weak worker bargaining power structurally in our economy, not because of robots, right, or because right. American workers are sort of fundamentally uneducated or ignorant and aren't ready for the jobs that are there. Right, all that is that's all lies. Right, we have high unemployment because we have a weak economy and weak demand, and we've got no bargaining power because we've got 30 years of public policy designed to take bargaining power away from workers, and by design to move wealth and income to to the top 1% of our society. That's what we've got. And essentially, these stories about technological change, and just to give an example of why this is obviously so, right, is that, for example, if this was an issue of education, we would see a pattern of workers getting more, getting income gains who were more educated, and we would see younger people who had college degrees and the like finding work. None of those things are happening. Right?
And we also wouldn't, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we also wouldn't see job creation happening more in the service sector than anywhere else. Both things can't be true, right?
Right. So these stories are stories that are told sometimes by well-meaning people, sometimes not, right, who know that politically, right, corporate power in America is not going to allow the truth to be told here. So a person looks at the situation and says, I once heard President Clinton say this effectively from the podium. He said, well, we can't get agreement on fiscal policy or monetary policy or what the unemployment rate should be, but we can all agree on education, so let's talk about that. And the problem with that is it's well-meaning, but it's not the real problem, and you're going to condemn the country to permanent mass unemployment and permanent soft labor markets and permanent disconnection of wages from productivity and permanent radical inequality if you go into that fantasy world where the problem is robots or training or something like that. Now, that being said, technological change is a fact of the 20th century. In fact, it's a fact of the 19th century. It's been with us for about 150 years on really rapid terms, in some ways it is accelerating. And it's going to mean that there will be some jobs that are being done today by people that in the future will be done by some kind of machine. Now, this is not something new. In fact, there was vast displacement of workers by technology, for example, during the period when the United States had full unemployment and rising real wages, and when wages kept up with productivity in the post-war era. Right? Computers, plastics, jet engines, these things displaced a lot of jobs, but they created new ones. Right? The likely thing that's going to happen here as the process of technological change accelerates is that you will see some jobs go away and new jobs and other jobs come into existence that don't now exist. The issue is, will we have full employment? Will we have labor laws that work? Will we have will workers have real bargaining power? Will we have an international trade regime that encourages rising wages rather than the current one, which encourages falling wages? Those are the real questions, and those are the real questions regardless of technological change.
Right, and I very well said. And as we enter into this era of change, I noticed the president had a commission on that's met a couple times about the impact of technological change on employment. I also noticed that worker representatives were outnumbered by corporate heads by about 10-1 on that commission. So I think part of the challenge going forward is, as we confront the displacing or transformative effect of these new technologies, I want the working men and women of America seated at the table with an equal voice to talk about how we navigate ourselves through this change and create the new jobs that replace the old jobs going forward. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, although I'll tell you, there's only one way to get to the table, and that is to organize. You'll never be invited in, because they miss you.
Right. No, I guess that's true, and which gets us back to where we started, which is the great work that's happening from the ground up and organizationally in the labor movement to help the Walmart workers and the McDonald's workers and the fast food workers and $15 minimum wage, and you guys are a part of that. So thanks so much, Damon Silvers of the AFL-CIO, for joining us.
You're very welcome, Richard. Take care.
You too. And we'll be right back after this on the Zero Hour.